The tariffs impact the country, but what about this province? Let's go to Provincial Affairs reporter Michelle Bellefontaine to take us through Alberta's reaction. Michelle, let's start with the Premier.
Well, Nancy, while most provincial premiers held news conferences about the tariff today, Premier Danielle Smith made one media appearance, and it was on the U.S. cable network CNBC. Smith said she was very disappointed the tariffs were here and that people on both sides of the border will get hurt.
We've addressed every issue that was raised about the border. As issues have been raised, we've been solving them, and yet new issues keep on popping up, which suggests that we've got a president that actually doesn't want a deal, and that's a problem. And so what that means is that we have to be prepared that this might not just be a 1 week problem or a 1 month problem. It might be a 4-year problem, and 4 years is a long time.
Smith also said she doesn't want restrictions on oil and gas exports. Now, in a written statement sent later, Smith called the tariffs foolish and said that she supports the federal government's response. She said it's time to tear down provincial trade barriers and to unite as a province and a country. Now, there were no other media availabilities from Smith today, no interviews with Canadian outlets. We're told she's planning a news conference tomorrow in her Brooks Medicine hat riding. She said she is meeting with her cabinet today and tomorrow to discuss how Alberta will respond, and those details will be announced tomorrow. Now, the NDP leader, Naheed Nenshi, put out a statement chastising the Premier for her efforts to talk to Trump at Mar-a-Lago and for attending the inauguration in Washington. He accused her of not having a plan to deal with the tariff impact and said she's hiding today, trying to pull something together at the last minute. But there's no news conference for him today either, and he's waiting until Smith talks tomorrow.
So a lot going on in this province, obviously. What about what other premiers are saying?
Well, in contrast with Smith, many other premiers, like, for example, every premier in the Atlantic Canada, the premiers of Quebec, Ontario, Manitoba, and BC, they all spoke out today. Most of those provinces are taking measures like pulling U.S. products out of their liquor stores, banning or putting higher costs on American companies bidding on contracts in their provinces. Ontario Premier Doug Ford said he is tearing up Ontario's controversial contract with Starlink, Elon Musk's internet venture, and he's also threatening to impose a 25% charge on electricity going to New York, Michigan, and Minnesota if the tariffs persist, and maybe even cut that electricity flow entirely.
So, Michelle, do you get any sense of where we go from here?
Well, last week's provincial budget laid out 3 scenarios. There was a best case scenario, a worst case scenario, and then the base case scenario, which the budget was actually based on. Still hard to say at this point which one will apply. It depends on how long the tariffs will last. Now, we talked to Greg Anderson. He is a professor of political science at the University of Alberta. He specializes in Canada-U.S. relations. You'll recall that Smith faced a lot of criticism for going to Mar-a-Lago and to Washington. But Anderson says that trip wasn't such a bad idea.
The fact that it didn't pay off doesn't mean that it wasn't useful. The fact that you can't tie that strategy to something specific in terms of a policy change doesn't mean it was necessarily a waste of time or a useless effort, because it may pay dividends down the road. That connectivity, maintaining those relationships, that maintaining that appreciation of what's here and the deepness of the trade relationship is always useful.
Now, Nancy Anderson says the uncertainty is the worst part of this whole situation, like what could happen next, when would the tariffs be called off, which he says is tough on businesses that need some predictability when it comes to making investment decisions.
Yeah. All right, thank you so much, Michelle.